Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We're very high energy today.
No, we're not. And you may hear dogs barking, but we're that kind of podcast, video cast.
Yeah. Well, and I also, if I don't know how many, nobody's watching these videos, but I'm also not watching. I've taken a little bit of a breather where I'm watching like one movie a day, if I'm even watching a movie a day, which, I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right, but less going on movie wise in my life last week.
I've been watching lighter stuff in general. I'm not sure I've been watching that much less movies. I've been rewatching things too, so.
Yeah, well, I finished Airbender, and we're actually halfway through The Mandalorian now, so I'm still watching things. But although The Mandalorian is 8 episodes, and they're kind of short, so. Anyways, neither here nor there.
Yeah. I
Uh,
started rewatching Dark, even though I haven't finished watching Dark, which just felt appropriate.
it does feel appropriate. Anyways, so let's jump into our first movie that we're going to talk about, The Quiet Earth,
Which I
from
feel like is going to include discussion of the world, the flesh, and the devil.
yes, The Quiet Earth is from 1985. And is
Mm-hmm.
a new I think it's New Zealand and not
Yes, it is
um
New Zealand.
and The World, the Flesh and the Devil I think is 1959.
I'm
uh,
pretty sure, yes, you are correct.
and so The Quiet Earth is theoretically based on something else, some sort of novel, I think, or maybe it's a short story, I forget, but it's based on something.
It's based on a few things. It's based on I Am Legend, Dawn of the Dead, and
But it's like
especially,
credited I think to I Am Legend or something. It's credited to a book, like it's
well, there's
based
the
on.
Purple Cloud, is it the Purple Cloud?
Maybe it's the purple. I don't know, but I know that it's credited to something. But anybody who has seen The World, the Flesh, and the Devil is like, oh, so you just remade, like you did an unofficial remake of The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. Um,
Yes.
okay, so sorry. So reminder, spoilers for this movie and for The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, I guess. And a little synopsis of The Quiet Earth is that we the movie starts on a man waking up and he's
Are
going
you
about his day.
Are you going
What's
to
it?
talk about the most important part? I mean, I know you're trying to do a short synopsis here, but we start on a naked man,
A
full
naked man,
on, just
full
there.
there,
Hello.
which
Hello,
again,
New Zealand.
I always appreciate unrestrained penis in a movie. And so we start on a naked man who's waking up, and then he starts going about his day. But as he goes about his day, he realizes that there's nobody else there as he drives to work, I think, and like goes places and does things. And then he shows up at a lab that he works, and he's like, "Oh, you've really done it now." And he realizes that the
The
experiment he worked
implication
on,
is something at that lab caused everybody to vanish.
yes,
And should I do the synopsis? I do synopsises a little stronger than you.
go for it.
Not to be mean, but so he spends a little while going crazy. I would say the first third of the movie, and then he meets a woman, and then they're just really happy to know that there's someone else there. And then eventually they meet a third person who is, I believe, Maori.
I think he's
Um,
Mallory.
yes, Maori. And there is a little bit of interesting tension between the three of them. And this closely matches The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, except at that point, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil is all about the sexual, racial dynamics of the three characters, which in the case of The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, you start with a black man who meets a white woman and then a white man. In this case, you start with a very, very white man who meets a white woman and then the Maori man. And the racial stuff is much lighter and really it's way more sci-fi. It's like someone who watched The World and the Flesh and the Devil said, I don't like all this social commentary. I like the sci-fi stuff, and they made this movie. So the last bit of the movie is about them figuring out why they were still there and then trying to, because it's going to happen again, basically figuring out a way of stopping it or or getting out of it. I can't remember that clearly. And then
Yeah.
it ends on a weird note.
Yes. And I would say that I remember we talked about some of the reviews for The World, the Flesh, and the Devil were like, it's not really sci-fi, it's missing sci-fi elements. And you and I were like, well, those reviews are silly. That wasn't the point of the movie. And the person who made this movie apparently believed in those reviews. which isn't at the detriment of The Quiet Earth, because The Quiet Earth is a good movie, but it does, like, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil is probably a little worse in the second half, the last third of the movie, because the movie can't quite go as far into racial and sexual dynamic stuff as it wants to because of the Hays Code, which still existed barely at that point.
Because Harry Belafonte could not touch his white co-star.
Yeah.
Woman. It's just absurd. So they had that haircutting scene, which is great.
Yes.
But when you know why it happened, it's a little,
Yes. And then the Quiet Earth is probably a little worse in the second half, last third, because a Maori man shows up and it just doesn't really go anywhere that interesting as far as the dramatic elements. Like, it's not terrible, and there's something there but what's there is more about, what's in The Quiet Earth is more about personal, like, dynamics as opposed to, like, societal dynamics, which is fine, but just isn't quite as interesting.
Very true. It's also the 80s, so there's just sex, like, just
sex.
Yeah, and it's definitely less cerebral and more personal. I like the Maori character. I thought he was interesting.
Yeah, the character is interesting. Just what they do with the societal elements, the cultural societal implications isn't that interesting.
I found the tension kind of more, and it may just actually be a result of the dynamics being just different because it's the 80s and it's a different country than our country. It's in Hamilton, New Zealand, which is weird because, like, how many big cities are in New Zealand anyway? Like, I think isn't that the country where sheep outnumber people like 23-1? I'm sure there's other countries like that, but
I wonder if that's one of those things that someone threw out for fun but is completely misleading. Who knows?
Yeah, it just I could probably name one country in New Zealand, one city in New Zealand competently, and that's Auckland.
Auckland, yeah.
Yeah, it's I enjoy seeing movies that take place in different places, and it's funny when you realize just how rarely you see New Zealand films. Apparently Hamilton in 1986 had a population of 94,000. That's a fair sized city, but
it's bigger, bigger than Lompoc, if we're thinking in terms of what we know.
Anyway, where was I going before I went off on that tangent?
I don't know. Okay,
what I kind of want to say about it is, there's a habit of saying, like, there's only 3 stories, or there's only 7 stories, or there's only, like, when you look at storytelling and writing and so on, which in a positive way is meant to kind of get you to stop trying to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Because whatever machinations of the plot you're making, someone's done it before. Right. But there's a million ways of telling a story. And so I really enjoyed The Quiet Earth as a remake that does something different.
Yeah.
And in this era, well, it was, now with COVID, nothing's happening, but, remakes and sequels and reboots and so on. I'm not against remakes if you're going to do something interesting with them. Like, we already have The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, and you could probably now do something a little more interesting with it because of, in fact, it might be a great one to redo, like, right now and really dig deep in a way that they couldn't. But at the same time, I would hope they'd change the characters up. Like, it wouldn't, like, Harry Belafonte is so capable, like, he's almost like a Sidney Poitier type of a character, and, do something more interesting with that. Like, so I'm I'm interested in seeing stories done different ways. They just have to be different enough. And I appreciate that about The Quiet Earth. And I appreciate that they kept some of the dynamics that were in The World, the Flesh, and the Devil in. But it was interesting. I saw The Quiet Earth first. I saw it in the other order than you.
Yeah.
And I watched it and I thought it felt like something was missing. It felt like they like tentatively approached a few topics and then backed away from them.
Yeah.
And so when I found out that like, oh, there's this other film that goes heavy into those things, then it made sense to me.
Yeah, I think that's that's how I was looking to describe it. I hadn't found the words, but even watching it, I mean, I watched it, as you said, in World of Flesh and the Devil, and then The Quiet Earth order. And watching The Quiet Earth, it felt like something was missing, and I just sort of immediately assumed it was the racial sort of stuff that was in The World of Flesh and the Devil. Maybe that is what's missing, but really what I should say as a critique is it just feels like something is missing. Yeah. And there's also some weird cuts and some weird dialogue that happens between the characters. Feels like they probably had longer scenes that they needed to cut down, or it might have just been someone who didn't know how to film certain interactions very well, or maybe they, any number of things. Because most of the movie is well directed. I don't think the director necessarily didn't know what they were doing, but there was something about some of that. So those two things are like my critiques for it. What I was going to bring up, that this does fall into the Mad Max apocalyptic genre. And I was trying to think when Mad Max was. 1979 is when the first one comes out. The sequel comes out in 81. And then Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome comes out in 1985, which is the same year as The Quiet Earth.
I've actually never seen that. I've seen the other.
I've seen the first one and Fury Road, so I'm missing the two in between, and then I know there's a new one I think that's going to come out someday.
Yeah.
But excuse me. I have to. It's interesting because it's, film. It's interesting because Mad Max is Australia, right? Or is Mad Max also New Zealand? I think
no, Mad Max is Australia.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I mean they're sister countries. They're
both over there.
Yeah,
they have white people who speak English in them.
Yes, as well as, indigenous populations and all that.
Right.
And it's interesting to sort of watch the Quiet Earth and sort of, I wonder because Australia has an interesting film industry, and I know a little bit more about the modern film industry there because of a few video essays about the Hobbits, the Hobbit movies, which I've never seen. I've only seen the first one. And The Lord of the Rings, because they were all filmed in, I think they were filmed in New Zealand mostly. But just between New Zealand and Australia, it's sort of interesting to look at like it would be interesting to look at what the dynamic is between the two film industries and also just countries, because they're linked in my mind, but I don't know that they're linked in real life. I assume they are because of how they're perceived in culture, but it's also interesting because just The Quiet Earth is just another one of these movies that is a part of the, I assume, boom of post-apocalyptic movies that happened around Mad Max.
Yeah.
Because Mad Max was really popular in its day. And I don't know a whole lot of like those movies. I think I've seen other ones. I'm like blanking, but I feel like I've watched another one recently. But anyway, so just sort of interesting to think like The Quiet Earth is like...
The Cars That Ate Paris is a...
Right. The Cars That Ate Paris is another...
It's Australian.
Oh, and there's also the A Boy and His Dog.
Yeah, but that's American.
It isn't actually. What year is A Boy and His Dog?
Somewhere in the 70s. So the Cars That Ate Paris are 74.
A Boy and His Dog. Oh, come on! Why won't you load? You stupid.
I mean,
it's 1975. Yeah. So there's like. Go ahead. So there's A Boy and His Dog in 75, and so I guess Mad Max isn't the one that like sets off the trend, because apocalyptic movies had been going on before that. I wonder where even Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove fits into all of this, but it's interesting that Mad Max, which comes out in 79, is the one that seems to be the most remembered, or at least is one of the most popular of that genre.
I think it's actually the Mel Gibson the first one's Mel Gibson too. It's the second Mel Gibson one that people kind of know better though, honestly.
Right, which I haven't seen, so.
No, I mean, it may have changed by now, but like a while ago, no one knew about that very first one. They all knew about the
second
Mad
one.
Max Road Warrior, I think it gets called.
Interesting. Anyways, I don't have a lot else to say about The Quiet Earth, just that it's interesting how it takes that formula from Mad Max. The first one is like, we're in the apocalypse. It's almost more the Blade Runner thing where it's like, nobody in Blade Runner thinks about how they're sort of living in the end times, which they aren't necessarily, but just like that, how like changed civilization is. Nobody in Mad Max is like, it's the apocalypse. It's Mad Max. And like, there's these things, gangs and whatever. And so The Quiet Earth is interesting in how it portrays the various aspects. And my final note is a silly one, which is that at one point in The Quiet Earth, when our man is going insane, he puts all these stand-ups, these cardboard stand-ups, which he's gotten from somewhere out front, and is like speaking to them like he's a king. And one of those stand-ups is a stand-up of Hitler. And me and my girlfriend, while watching The Quiet Earth, were like, where did he get that? Is there just is there a white supremacist in the neighborhood? Was it in a mall or something? Why would there be a Hitler stand-up in a mall? Why would there be a Hitler stand-up anywhere? Anyway.
I mean, it was the 80s, and of course there were white supremacists probably in the neighborhood. So
definitely, but like, why would they have had a Hitler stand-up? I don't know. That was very odd. That was an odd little piece of the movie. Anyways, other than that weirdness, it was a pretty good movie.
Well, I want to say that I really like both, and they're different enough that I wouldn't like. I'm not going to say which one's better than the other.
Oh yeah, no. They're even being a remake, they are that different.
I kind of like that The Quiet Earth has such a different, like he is like such a, like he's balding on top. He's not in a classically attractive man. Let's say he just looks like a middle-aged worker bee guy in New Zealand, and he starts naked, and I like the exploration of his madness, which they do less with Belafonte. Belafonte has that mannequin that he's picked up that definitely like represents white America and so on. But he's really more capable, more calm, more kind of. Yeah. It's getting to him. The isolation is getting to him, but he doesn't seem to reach the depths of madness. And I was kind of entertained by how long Quiet Earth spent on this main character being alone and losing his mind and all of that stuff before it went into him meeting someone. And I also just I like 80s weirdness more than 50s weirdness. But I do like the 50s weirdness. I mean, The World, the Flesh, and the Devil has that, great mannequin that he kind of takes over. It has they wash dishes by just throwing them out the window because it doesn't matter. They have all that empty New York footage, which is great. So it's really, they just have different strengths at really the end of the day.
Yeah, and I actually, even though I think The Quiet Earth gets a little funky in the last third or so, or it loses some steam maybe, I actually like the last I don't know what we would call it, the last 10 minutes of the movie or so. I sort of like I like both the resolution, and then I like what comes after the resolution. I think that's really neat. Like, I really kind of like that. I actually
like the science stuff, which isn't science, but the explanations for what was going on and how it had happened and so on. I really, and World, the Flesh, and the Devil doesn't really have that, and I really like that in The Quiet Earth. So
yeah, totally.
I'd love to see them do it again sometime with completely different characters.
Yeah.